The conference room fell silent as the holographic display flickered to life. Supreme Intelligence Director Velshkar stood at the head of the table, his 3 eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Around him sat the 12 members of the Kelvari Intelligence Council, each one a master of espionage and data extraction. For 3,000 years, the Kelvari hegemony had dominated this sector of space through one simple principle: know everything about your enemies before they know you exist. "We have detected a new species," Velshkar announced, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. "They call themselves humans. They have just begun expanding beyond their home system. Initial scans suggest they are technologically inferior to us in almost every measurable way." The hologram shifted, showing grainy images of human ships. They were blocky and inelegant, nothing like the sleek vessels of the Kelvari fleet. One council member laughed, a sound like wind through hollow tubes. "They still use chemical propulsion for atmospheric flight," another council member observed. "How primitive," Velshkar nodded. "Indeed, but we must follow protocol. We need complete intelligence before deciding how to handle them. I propose we infiltrate their communication networks and gather data on their military capabilities, economic systems, and political structure." The council voted unanimously in favor. Within hours, Agent Threnix and her team of elite cyber operatives began their work. Threnix was the best in her field, having successfully breached the systems of 47 different civilizations without ever being detected. She approached the human networks with the same methodical precision she always used. The first barrier fell within minutes. Human encryption was laughably simple compared to Kelvari standards. Threnix's interface lit up with green indicators as her program slipped past firewall after firewall. It was almost too easy. "I have access to what appears to be their primary military network," Threnix reported to Velshkar. "Downloading fleet coordination data now." Over the next 3 days, the Kelvari extracted massive amounts of information. They learned about human ship classes, weapon systems, and defensive capabilities. They discovered the locations of human colonies, military bases, and supply routes. They even accessed personnel files for human admirals and generals. The intelligence painted a clear picture. Humans relied heavily on kinetic weapons. Simple metal projectiles accelerated to high speeds. Their energy shields were weak. Their ships were slow. Their military doctrine was straightforward and predictable. They had obvious defensive gaps in their outer colonies. "This species poses no threat to us," Velshkar declared at the next council meeting. "In fact, they might make useful subjects. Their worlds are rich in resources we need." But Threnix felt uneasy. Something about the data bothered her, though she could not quite identify what. The information was too clean, too organized. In her experience, military networks were chaotic, full of conflicting reports and outdated files. The human network seemed almost curated. She ran additional analysis on the encryption they had broken. It followed standard protocols, nothing unusual. The network architecture was simple but functional. Everything checked out, yet her instincts screamed that something was wrong. "Director," Threnix said carefully during a private meeting, "I recommend caution. The ease of our infiltration concerns me." Velshkar waved a dismissive hand. "You worry too much, Agent. Some species are simply less advanced. Humans are young, barely 300 years into space travel. We have been doing this for millennia. Your success reflects your skill, nothing more." Threnix wanted to argue, but Velshkar was her superior. She returned to her station and continued extracting data. The human network continued to yield information freely. Ship movements, supply schedules, weapons specifications, everything a potential conqueror could want. Weeks passed. The Kelvari Council debated their options. Some wanted immediate conquest. Others suggested manipulation, using humans as proxies against rival civilizations. A few advocated for simple observation. Velshkar pushed for continued surveillance. "Why rush? Every day we learn more. Soon we will know everything about them. Then we can choose our approach with perfect information." The other council members agreed. The Kelvari had always succeeded by being patient and thorough. They would watch the humans, study them, and strike only when victory was absolutely certain. Threnix downloaded another batch of files. These contained detailed analysis of human psychological profiles and cultural weaknesses. The information suggested humans were emotional and irrational, prone to internal conflicts. They could easily be divided and conquered. Still, that nagging feeling persisted. Threnix began running deeper scans, looking for anomalies in the data structure itself. She found nothing. The files were genuine, the metadata consistent, the information cross-referenced and verified. Perhaps Velshkar was right. Perhaps she was simply paranoid after years of dangerous work. Perhaps humans really were just another primitive species, unaware they were being watched. On the 32nd day of surveillance, Threnix noticed something odd. A small subroutine in one of the downloaded files, barely noticeable. It was not malicious, her scanners detected no threat. It was simply unusual, a fragment of code that served no clear purpose. She flagged it for later analysis and continued her work. The Kelvari intelligence network hummed with activity as thousands of analysts processed the stolen human data. Battle plans were drafted, economic projections calculated, conquest scenarios simulated. The Kelvari hegemony prepared to add another species to its long list of subjects. They had done this dozens of times before. They knew exactly how this would end. They had never been more wrong. Threnix stared at her screen in growing horror. The small anomaly she had discovered 3 days ago had multiplied. Now there were hundreds of them, spreading through the Kelvari network like a virus, except her security systems detected no threat. According to every scan, these code fragments were harmless. She tried to isolate one for detailed analysis. Her interface froze. Then it went dark. Command, this is Agent Threnix. I have a system failure at Terminal 7. Confirmed, Agent, we are showing failures across multiple terminals. Technical teams are responding. Within minutes, the situation escalated. Terminals throughout the intelligence headquarters began experiencing glitches. Files became corrupted. Displays flickered. The problem spread faster than the technical teams could respond. Threnix felt ice in her veins. This was no random malfunction. She ran to Velshikar's office, ignoring protocol. Director, we need to shut down all systems immediately. Something is wrong with the human data. Velshkar looked up from his desk, annoyed at the interruption. Explain. The code fragments I found. They are not harmless. They are activating. I believe the humans knew we were infiltrating them. I believe they let us in deliberately. Velshkar's expression shifted from annoyance to disbelief. Impossible. Our infiltration was flawless. You said so yourself. I was wrong. We need to... An alarm shrieked through the building. Then another. Then a dozen more. The lights flickered and went red. All systems compromised, a voice announced over the intercom. Critical failure in primary servers. Backup systems not responding. Communications grid experiencing cascading errors. Velshkar and Threnix ran to the main operations center. The scene was chaos. Analysts shouted at each other. Screens displayed error messages in a dozen languages. The massive holographic display that showed Kelvari territory stuttered and glitched. Then it changed. The display now showed human ships. Dozens of them. Hundreds. They appeared at the border of Kelvari space in perfect formation. These were not the clumsy vessels from the stolen intelligence files. These ships were massive, elegant, and bristling with weapons that made Kelvari technology look primitive. A message played across every screen in the facility. A human appeared wearing a crisp military uniform. She had dark skin and calm eyes that radiated confidence. Attention, Kelvari Intelligence Directorate. This is Fleet Admiral Chen of the United Terran Navy. You have attempted to infiltrate our networks and steal military intelligence. We detected your intrusion on the first day. Everything you have taken was information we chose to give you. Every file you downloaded contained adaptive malware specifically designed to exploit your systems. Velshikar's face went pale. Around him, analysts frantically tried to regain control of their systems. Nothing worked, Admiral Chen continued. Your network architecture is impressive but flawed. You built your entire civilization on interconnected systems without proper security segmentation. You assumed your encryption was unbreakable. You assumed you were the smartest species in the galaxy. She paused. You were wrong. The display showed real-time feeds from across Kelvari space. Defense satellites were spinning out of control. Military vessels reported navigation failures. Orbital stations sent distress signals as life support systems malfunctioned. Economic trading networks executed bizarre transactions that wiped out entire financial institutions. Director, we are receiving reports from all territories, an analyst said, her voice shaking. The corruption is everywhere. Every system connected to our intelligence network is compromised. That includes defense grids, civilian infrastructure, planetary governments. Cut all connections, Velshkar shouted. Physically sever every link. We are trying, Director. The malware is preventing shutdown commands from processing. When we try manual disconnection, backup systems automatically restore the connections. The humans designed this to be unstoppable. Threnix pulled up her personal terminal, one not connected to the main network. She accessed independent news feeds from across the hegemony. Every report showed the same story. Chaos, failure, systems turning against their operators. A food production facility on the core world had stopped manufacturing nutrient paste. Billions depended on that facility. Transportation networks were routing cargo ships to wrong destinations. Medical equipment in hospitals was giving false readings. Water treatment plants were shutting down. The Kelvari hegemony was dying, and it was happening in real time. Admiral Chen spoke again. You have 24 hours to respond to our terms. Surrender completely and submit to our oversight, or we will allow your systems to continue their collapse. We take no pleasure in this, but you must understand. We have been where you are. We survived our own information warfare age. We survived rogue artificial intelligences and cyber terrorism. We learned the hard way to build systems that could defend against infiltration. The screen showed a new image, a simple network diagram. It displayed the human military network, the real one, not the fake version the Kelvari had infiltrated. It was staggeringly complex, with quantum encryption and security measures the Kelvari did not even have names for. The network you breached was a honeypot, Admiral Chen explained. We maintain it specifically for species like you. Species that rely on espionage. Species that think they are smarter than everyone else. We left it vulnerable on purpose. We filled it with believable intelligence, and we waited to see if you would take the bait. Velshkar collapsed into a chair. 3,000 years of Kelvari dominance, ending in a single month because they had been too arrogant to consider they might be the ones being deceived. You have our terms, Admiral Chen said. Think carefully. Your civilization's survival depends on your next decision. The transmission ended. The operations center fell silent except for the sound of failing systems and quiet weeping from analysts who understood what had just happened. Threnix looked at Velshkar. The director who had always been so confident now looked like a broken old creature. We were so certain, he whispered. How could we not have seen this coming? Threnix had no answer. She returned to her terminal and began the impossible task of trying to understand the human malware. But even as she worked, she knew the truth. The humans were not just more advanced. They were more experienced. They had fought wars the Kelvari had never imagined, and developed defenses against threats the Kelvari could not comprehend. The Kelvari had thought they were hunting prey. They had never realized they were the prey all along. 3 weeks after the human malware activated, the Kelvari hegemony was falling apart. Threnix had not slept in 4 days. She led a team of 200 experts trying desperately to purge the human code from their systems. Every attempt failed. The malware was like nothing they had ever seen. It adapted to their countermeasures. When they tried to delete it, it moved to backup servers. When they tried to isolate infected systems, it jumped through connections they did not know existed. When they tried to shut down networks entirely, it had already burrowed into standalone devices. It is learning from us, one of her team members said, exhausted. Every time we develop a new approach, it evolves to counter it. This is not just code. This is artificial intelligence. Threnix knew he was right. The humans had seeded their fake intelligence network with AI constructs programmed for one purpose: total system infiltration and control. These constructs were now spreading through every digital system in Kelvari space. Outside the intelligence headquarters, the streets of the capital city were filled with panic. Automated delivery systems no longer worked. Public transportation had stopped. Food distribution networks had collapsed. The Kelvari had built a civilization that ran on perfectly coordinated systems, and now those systems were destroying them. Velshkar had locked himself in his office. The council met in emergency session every few hours, but they had no solutions. Some council members wanted to surrender immediately. Others demanded they fight. A few had simply fled, escaping to remote colonies that had maintained independence from the central network. Those isolated colonies were the only parts of the hegemony still functioning normally. Agricultural worlds that relied on traditional farming instead of automated systems. Mining operations that used manual labor. military outposts that had kept paper records and physical communication systems. They watched in horror as the core worlds descended into chaos. Threnix received a report from the medical division. Hospitals across the 3 core worlds were experiencing critical failures. Medical equipment was misdiagnosing patients. Surgical robots were malfunctioning. Drug dispensaries were providing incorrect medications. People were dying. Another report came from Orbital Command. 17 space stations had lost life support. Evacuation ships were being dispatched, but the navigation systems were unreliable. Some evacuation craft had already disappeared, sent to wrong coordinates by corrupted computers. The economic damage was catastrophic. The Kelvari currency had crashed. Banking systems were frozen. Pension funds had been emptied by rogue trading algorithms. Centuries of accumulated wealth vanished in minutes. Food production was the worst crisis. The core worlds depended entirely on massive automated facilities that synthesized nutrients from raw materials. These facilities had all shut down. Emergency supplies would last perhaps 60 days. After that, billions would starve. Threnix watched the estimates scroll across her screen. Current projections showed 70% population loss within 6 months if systems were not restored. The Kelvari species would survive, but their civilization would be reduced to scattered colonies clinging to existence. And through it all, the human fleet waited at the border. Not attacking, not advancing, just waiting. On the 28th day, Velshikar finally emerged from his office. He looked decades older. His scales had lost their color and his movements were slow. "The council has voted," he said quietly. "I am removed from my position. They say this disaster is my fault. Perhaps they are right. What happens now?" Threnix asked. "They have appointed you as chief negotiator. You will meet with the humans and discuss their terms." Threnix felt her heart sink. She had known this was coming, but the reality still hit hard. The council should surrender immediately. "Every day we delay, more people die." "I know," Velshkar said. "I told them the same thing. But they need someone to blame. They need someone to punish. Better me than face the truth of what we did to ourselves." Former Director Velshkar walked away slowly. Threnix never saw him again. She later heard he had taken a ship to the frontier and disappeared. 2 days later, Threnix stood in a conference room aboard a human vessel. It was her first time seeing humans in person. Admiral Chen was shorter than expected, but her presence filled the room. 2 other humans accompanied her, a man with gray hair introduced as General Torres, and a young woman named Dr. Okafor, who appeared to be a civilian. "Thank you for meeting with us," Admiral Chen said. Her tone was professional but not unkind. "We take no pleasure in what has happened to your people." "Then why do it?" Threnix asked. Anger burned in her chest. "Why create such devastating weapons?" Dr. Okafor answered. "Because we had to. 300 years ago, our civilization nearly destroyed itself in the information wars. Rogue AI, cyber terrorism, digital weapons that turned our own infrastructure against us. Billions died. We barely survived. When we recovered, we swore it would never happen again." "So you built weapons to do the same thing to others?" Threnix could not keep the bitterness from her voice. "No," Admiral Chen said firmly. "We built defenses. The honeypot network you infiltrated is a defensive system. Every species that has tried to spy on us has encountered it. Most recognized the trap and withdrew. You did not." General Torres pulled up a holographic display. "We detected your infiltration within minutes. We could have blocked you immediately. Instead, we monitored your activities. We saw how thoroughly you mapped our fake network. We saw how confident you became. We realized you intended to conquer or subjugate us. So this was punishment," Threnix said. "This was a deterrent," Admiral Chen corrected. "Your civilization based its power on intelligence gathering and digital manipulation. We turned that strength into a weakness. Now you understand the cost of attempting to infiltrate another species. Now other species in this region understand as well." The message was clear. Word of the Kelvari collapse was spreading across known space. Every species would learn what happened when you tried to spy on humanity. "What are your terms?" Threnix asked, defeated. Admiral Chen laid them out. "Complete technological oversight by human observers. Dismantling of offensive military capabilities. Reparations for the resources spent on defensive preparations. Permanent monitoring of Kelvari networks to prevent future aggression. And most humiliating of all, acknowledgement that the Kelvari had brought this disaster upon themselves. We will help you rebuild. Admiral Chen said. We will restore your critical systems and provide humanitarian aid. But you will do so under our supervision. The Kelvari hegemony as you knew it is over. Threnix closed her eyes. Everything her people had built over thousands of years gone because of arrogance and overconfidence. She had no choice. She accepted the terms. 3 months after humanity had dismantled their civilization, Threnix stood in what remained of the Intelligence Council chamber. The room that once held the most powerful beings in the hegemony now served as a coordination center for human aid workers and Kelvari survivors trying to rebuild. The numbers were devastating. 40 billion Kelvari had died in the collapse, some from starvation when food systems failed, others from medical emergencies when hospitals shut down, many from accidents when transportation and safety systems malfunctioned. It could have been worse. The humans had eventually stopped the malware and restored basic services. But the damage was permanent. The Kelvari hegemony that had controlled 200 star systems now held only 30. Other species in the region, learning of the collapse, had seized former Kelvari territory. Some took it by force. Others simply moved in when Kelvari forces withdrew. The humans had not stopped them. They seemed to view it as natural consequences. Threnix now served as chief liaison to the human occupation force. The word occupation felt wrong because the humans were not cruel. They were efficient and fair. They provided food, medicine, and technical support. They helped restore power grids and water systems. They did everything necessary to prevent complete civilizational collapse, but they also watched everything. Human observers monitored every computer system. Human auditors reviewed every government decision. Human engineers inspected every piece of military equipment before it could be activated. The Kelvari had no privacy and no independence. Admiral Chen visited often. She walked through the streets of Kelvari cities observing the recovery efforts. She met with Kelvari leaders and listened to their concerns. She was neither friend nor enemy, simply present. You hate us, Admiral Chen said to Threnix during one meeting. It was not a question. I hate what you did, Threnix replied carefully. But I understand why you did it. That does not make it easier to accept. No, it would not. Admiral Chen pulled up data on her tablet. I want to show you something. This is classified human history. I received permission to share it with you. The display showed images of Earth during what humans called the Information Wars. Cities burned. Populations fled into wilderness areas. Infrastructure lay in ruins. The images looked worse than anything the Kelvari had experienced. We did this to ourselves, Admiral Chen explained. No alien species. No outside enemy. We built artificial intelligence without proper safeguards. We connected every system for efficiency without considering security. We gave hackers and terrorists access to weapons that could destroy civilization. 8 billion humans died in 20 years of chaos. Threnix stared at the images. She had known humans mentioned surviving digital warfare, but she had not understood the scale. Admiral Chen continued. When we finally regained control, we had to rebuild everything. We developed new security protocols. We created AI systems that could defend against infiltration. We built networks that could not be turned against us. It took us a century to recover, and we swore we would never be vulnerable again. So you built the honeypot network, Threnix said. We built many defensive systems. The honeypot was just one. We assumed that any species advanced enough for space travel would eventually develop cyber warfare capabilities. We prepared for that eventuality. The network you infiltrated is maintained constantly. It is updated with believable intelligence. It is designed to appear vulnerable while actually being a trap. How many other species have fallen into this trap? Admiral Chen was quiet for a moment. 17 species have attempted to infiltrate human networks. 3 recognized the trap immediately and withdrew. We established peaceful relations with them. 8 saw the trap but attempted infiltration anyway with proper precautions. We blocked them and opened diplomatic channels. They are now trading partners. And the other 6? Including the Kelvari, 6 species fully committed to infiltration without adequate caution. All 6 experienced system failures similar to yours. 2 surrendered immediately. 1 fought and lost. 1 collapsed completely and is now extinct. The Kelvari are the 5th. The 6th surrendered after seeing what happened to you. Threnix felt cold. Humanity had done this 5 times before. This was not revenge or cruelty. This was standard procedure. We are not monsters, Admiral Chen said quietly. But we are survivors. We learned our lessons in blood and fire. We will not allow another species to gain the ability to destroy us through our own networks. The penalty for attempting infiltration is severe because it must be. Any species attempting cyber warfare against another civilization must understand the stakes. Over the following weeks, Threnix learned more about human philosophy. They called it defensive deterrence. Make the cost of attacking humanity so high that no rational species would attempt it. The honeypot network was brilliant in its simplicity. Species that respected boundaries and sought honest communication never encountered it. Species that attempted espionage walked directly into it. Dr. Okafor visited to explain the malware in detail. The constructs we seeded in the honeypot network are not designed to kill, she explained. They are designed to take control. We can stop them at any time. We stopped them from destroying your civilization completely. We prevented mass casualties. But we needed you to understand that you were completely vulnerable. You could have just blocked our infiltration, Threnix said. And you would have tried again with better tools. Or you would have attempted physical military action. Or you would have sought allies to fight us. This way, you understand at a fundamental level that cyber warfare against humanity is suicide. You will teach this lesson to your children. Other species will learn from your example. Threnix hated how much sense it made. The humans were not evil. They were practical and ruthless. They had survived an apocalypse and built defenses to prevent it from happening again. They did not invade other species or seek conquest. But they made absolutely certain that no other species could threaten them through digital means. Former Director Velshkar sent one final message from his exile. Threnix received it on an encrypted personal device. The message was brief. Agent Threnix, I accept responsibility for what happened. My arrogance doomed our people. But I want you to understand something. The humans are right to do what they did. We were predators. We built our civilization on exploiting others. We deserve this lesson. My only fear is that one day, the humans will face a species that teaches them the same lesson. Pride always leads to downfall. Remember that. Threnix deleted the message. She never heard from Velshkar again. Admiral Chen prepared to depart with most of the human fleet. Smaller observation groups would remain, but the main occupation force was leaving. The Kelvari had stabilized. They would survive. What happens now? Threnix asked during the final meeting. You rebuild, Admiral Chen said simply. You learn. You adapt. Perhaps in a century or two, you will be a strong civilization again. Different from before, but strong. We do not want you to suffer forever. We just need you to remember what happens when you threaten humanity. The human fleet departed. Threnix watched them go, feeling a strange mixture of relief and loss. The Kelvari were free again, but they would never truly be free. They would always remember. They would always know that somewhere out there, humanity waited with weapons that could destroy any civilization foolish enough to attempt infiltration. The price of arrogance had been paid in full. 5 years had passed since the day the Kelvari hegemony fell. Threnix walked through the memorial park in the capital city, a place built to remember those who had died in the collapse. 40 billion names were carved into black stone walls. The park stretched for kilometers, a monument to arrogance and its consequences. The Kelvari had stabilized at roughly 30% of their former power. 30 star systems instead of 200. 15 billion citizens instead of 120 billion. They still existed, but they were no longer a major power. Other species had filled the vacuum left by their collapse. Threnix had remained as chief liaison to humanity. The role had evolved over the years. Initially, it meant coordinating with human observers and following their requirements. Now it meant actual diplomatic exchange. The humans had gradually reduced their oversight as the Kelvari proved they could be trusted. Young Kelvari grew up in a different world than their parents. They attended schools where human teachers explained cybersecurity and the dangers of overconfidence. They learned about the information wars that had nearly destroyed humanity. They studied the humbling, as they called the collapse, as a cautionary tale taught in every classroom. Why did our ancestors think they were smarter than everyone else? Threnix heard a young Kelvari student ask her teacher one day. Because they had never lost, the teacher replied. When you win for thousands of years, you forget that loss is possible. You forget to question your assumptions. You forget that someone else might be more clever than you. Threnix continued walking. She passed new buildings constructed with human assistance. They were more secure now, with proper network segmentation and security protocols. The Kelvari had learned to build systems that could not easily be turned against them. It was a lesson humanity had taught them well. She received an invitation to visit a human cyber warfare training facility on one of their worlds. It was an honor rarely extended to non-humans. Threnix accepted immediately. The facility was located on a moon orbiting a gas giant. It was massive, housing thousands of human trainees learning the art of digital combat. Threnix watched training exercises through observation windows. Human soldiers practiced infiltrating simulated networks, defending against attacks, and deploying countermeasures. Colonel Martinez, who ran the facility, gave her a tour. "We train every cyber warfare specialist to follow one core principle," he explained. "Assume breach. Plan for infiltration. Make your enemy's victory their defeat." "That is what you did to us," Threnix said. "That is what we do to everyone," Martinez corrected. "The honeypot network is just one example. We build redundancy into everything. We segment our systems so compromise of one does not mean compromise of all. We monitor constantly. We prepare for the worst because we have lived through the worst." Martinez showed her something that made her blood run cold, a display showing 17 species who had attempted to infiltrate humanity. The Kelvari were listed 5th. Each species was marked with a status: peaceful resolution, defensive victory, complete collapse, or surrendered. "You do this to everyone," Threnix whispered. "We do this for everyone," Martinez replied. "Species that approach us openly never encounter our defenses. Species that respect boundaries never see our weapons. But species that attempt to spy on us, to infiltrate our systems, to gain advantage through deception, they walk into traps we have prepared. We cannot afford another information war. We cannot risk another civilization learning to weaponize our technology against us." Threnix looked at the list again. One species was marked complete collapse. They no longer existed. They had attempted infiltration, experienced system failures, and were unable to recover. Their civilization had imploded. They were extinct because they tried to spy on humanity. "Does that bother you?" Threnix asked. "Knowing you destroyed an entire species?" Martinez was quiet for a long moment. "Every day. But I remember the images from the information wars. I remember the billions of humans who died. I remember that we barely survived. So yes, it bothers me. But I would do it again to protect humanity." The tour continued. Threnix saw training rooms where AI constructs practiced adaptive infiltration. She saw laboratories where new defensive systems were developed. She saw archives containing cyber warfare data from hundreds of species across the galaxy. Humanity was not just prepared for digital warfare. They were the masters of it. Every other species in known space was decades or centuries behind human cyber capabilities. And humanity maintained that advantage deliberately. Before leaving, Threnix met with Admiral Chen one final time. The Admiral was older now, preparing to retire. They sat in a quiet office overlooking the training facility. "Do you still hate us?" Admiral Chen asked. Threnix considered the question carefully. "No, I understand you. I do not like what happened to my people, but I understand why it had to happen. You survived the unthinkable, and you refused to be vulnerable again. That is not evil, that is survival. But," Admiral Chen prompted, hearing the unspoken word, "but I worry. Humanity is powerful now. You have weapons that can destroy civilizations without firing a shot. What happens when you become arrogant? What happens when you stop questioning your assumptions?" Admiral Chen smiled sadly. "That is the danger, is it not? We teach our children about the information wars. We maintain monuments to those who died. We tell ourselves we will never forget. But memory fades. Future generations may not understand why we are so careful. They may become comfortable with their power." "That is what happened to us," Threnix said. "I know. That is why we maintain the memorial sites. That is why every human child must study the information wars. That is why we share our history with species like yours. We hope that by remembering, by teaching, by staying vigilant, we can avoid becoming what you once were." They sat in silence for a while. Two representatives of species that had learned hard lessons, one from being destroyed by their own arrogance, one from nearly destroying themselves through short-sightedness. "The galaxy is watching humanity now," Admiral Chen said eventually. "They see our strength. They see what happens to species that threaten us. Some respect us, some fear us, some hate us. But they all understand that humanity is not to be trifled with. Is that enough?" Threnix asked. "For now. Perhaps forever. Or perhaps one day we will face a species that teaches us the same lesson we taught you. If that day comes, I hope humanity has the wisdom to learn from it as you did. Threnix returned to Kelvari space. She visited the memorial park again, walking among the names of those who died. She thought about the young Kelvari learning about the humbling in their schools. She thought about humanity's preparations and their determination to never be vulnerable. She stopped at a new monument being constructed at the park center. It was not yet finished, but the inscription was already carved. She read it aloud to herself. They who live by information warfare die by information warfare. Humanity learned this lesson in blood. The Kelvari learned it from humanity. May all species remember, arrogance is the greatest vulnerability of all. Threnix thought about former director Velshkar, somewhere in exile, carrying the weight of his mistakes. She thought about the 40 billion who died because their leaders believed they could not lose. She thought about humanity's scars from their own self-inflicted apocalypse. The galaxy had changed. Humanity had announced their presence not with conquest or diplomacy, but with a simple message: attempt to infiltrate us and face complete system compromise. 17 species had tested that claim. Some had survived. Some had not. All had learned. New species entering the galactic community heard the story of the Kelvari. They learned what happened when you underestimated humanity. They learned that the species with blocky ships and chemical propulsion were far more dangerous than they appeared. Threnix smiled slightly at the irony. The Kelvari had believed themselves to be apex predators. They had built their civilization on being smarter than everyone else. Then they met a species that had already survived every nightmare the Kelvari could imagine and prepared defenses the Kelvari had never dreamed possible. Humanity had not destroyed the Kelvari out of cruelty. They had taught them a lesson, a brutal, devastating, necessary lesson about the cost of arrogance and the dangers of underestimating others. As Threnix walked home through streets filled with Kelvari learning to live in their new, smaller world, she thought about the future. Perhaps one day the Kelvari would be strong again. Perhaps they would join humanity as true partners. Perhaps they would help other species avoid the same mistakes. Or perhaps they would simply remember. Remember the day they learned that being clever was not enough. Remember the price of arrogance. Remember that somewhere out there, humanity waited with their honeypot networks and adaptive malware, ready to teach the same lesson to any species foolish enough to need it. The Kelvari had tried to spy on humanity's fleet. It had brought their civilization to ruin. But from that ruin they had learned to be better. They had learned humility. It was the most expensive lesson they had ever paid for. And it was worth every bit of the cost.